pronounced dead?
He was pronounced dead on November 16th at 2:27 in the morning.
So when is it then that you begin to perform your autopsy?
The autopsy procedure was started on November 17th and concluded that day also.
In terms of identifying a person who you're then going to have to perform an autopsy on, how is that normally done?
A variety of ways. For Mr. Winebrenner, we used the hospital identification band that he was given when he went to the hospital. And that is considered, by our standards, a positive identification because someone told the hospital personnel what his name is. Sometimes we don't have that information. Sometimes we have to compare someone's fingerprints to what they had when they were arrested. Sometimes we have to compare x-rays to what they had when they went to the dentist's office or the hospital. So there are a variety of ways that we make identification of a deceased person.
And in this particular case, Justin Winebrenner had a bracelet from the hospital?
Correct.
And who is present then, Dr. Dean, when you perform an autopsy in this case?
There were two people with me, in addition to our morgue attendant, Amy Schaefer, another investigator we have at our office, and Detective Tanisha Stewart from the Akron Police Department.
During the course of your autopsy then, do you take photographs?
Yes.
And why do you do that?
To document my findings. I take a lot more photographs than may be useful to other people, but I look at them all because there's something of value in every photograph to me. For Mr. Winebrenner, I took about 95 of them. I'll show you only a few of them because those are the ones I selected to assist you.
I'm going to hand you some photographs then. They are numbered Exhibit 147 through 159. Take a look at these then. Kind of go through them and let me know if you recognize them.
Yes, I do.
Okay, and all these exhibits are what, basically, generally?
These are photographs, some other photographs I took before and during Mr. Winebrenner's autopsy.
Do you also photograph clothing that comes in with a decedent as part of your autopsy?
For a situation such as this one, the victim of a homicide, yes, I do.
Okay. I'm going to take these from you now. The pictures that I just showed you then, these fairly inaccurately represent the decedent at the time we did the autopsy as well as his clothing at that time?
Yes.
So as you mentioned before, and as I have on the overhead, states Exhibit 156, I believe. I'm sorry, 144, your report of autopsy. After you perform the autopsy, you create this report and it also has your conclusions in it?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall what the cause of death was determined to be?
Yes.
What was that?
Mr. Winebrenner died from gunshot wounds to his torso.
And another key point, I guess, in your report is the manner of death. Can you tell us what the difference is between the cause of death and the manner of death?
Yes. For Mr. Winebrenner, the manner of death is homicide. The difference between those two features, the cause of death is the anatomic thing that went wrong to cause a person to die. Getting back to gunshot wounds. If a person is shot by someone else, the cause of death is gunshot wound. If the person shoots himself, the cause of death is gunshot wound. It's the anatomic thing that caused a person to die. The manner of death is how the incident occurred. For homicide, homicide means death at the hands of another person. Someone else shot this person. Suicide means the person killed themselves. So I can have the same cause of death, gunshot wound, separate manners of death. For manners of death, we only have 5 in Ohio. Accident, suicide, homicide, natural, and undetermined. We reserve the last category for those situations where we don't have enough information to make a good decision.
So I'm going to ask you then some specific questions regarding your findings during your autopsy. And in this case, I believe you said that the manner of death was due to homicide, correct?
Yes.
And have you created a PowerPoint presentation to help you go through your testimony to this jury?
Yes, I did.
I marked that exhibit as exhibit 146. So, putting in the disc 146, the PowerPoint, can you see that where you are?
Yes, I can.
Why don't you go ahead and start from there?
Sure. This first slide is an introductory slide so that you know the deceased person that we are speaking about. Mr. Winebrenner was a 32-year-old man. He died at the hands of another person from gunshot wounds to his torso. This is what Mr. Winebrenner looked like when he came to our office after his face was cleaned up of any extraneous blood or debris. Now, I want to point out one thing that is not an injury related. This is not an injury. Mr. Winebrenner is missing his right upper front tooth. He had it extracted sometime in the past for a dental problem. I don't know what from. He came with a small partial denture that fit there, but I didn't put it in there because I didn't want to break it. So that's why I took the picture as he came, as I always do, and I did not put that little piece in there, but I gave it back to the funeral home. So I want to point out that that is not an injury.
And when, the next slide. Before we get to this, when you are, when a person comes to you, like in this case, Justin Winebrenner for autopsy, is there evidence then of medical intervention to try to save his life?
Sometimes there is.
In this particular case, I believe there were a number of things you noted in your report where medical emergency personnel tried to medicate and save his life.
Yes.
Okay. So under your your findings and your diagnosis, can you talk about, first of all, how many times was Mr. Winebrenner shot?
Yes, Mr. Winebrenner was shot 2 times, both times in the front of his torso. I labeled them arbitrarily. I can't possibly know in what order he was shot, so I arbitrarily labeled them 1 and 2, just because I had to pick something. So, going back to gunshot wound number 1, it was on the right side of his chest. This bullet injured ribs, the diaphragm, which is a big breathing muscle for the lungs, his right lung, and it collapsed his right lung down, squashed it down. He also injured his liver, and he lost a lot of blood in his chest space and in his abdominal cavity. From there, the bullet exited his body.
So just from that first, I'm not think it's the first gunshot wound, but it's the first one you documented, correct?
Yes.
And can you describe to the jury, you talked about the blood that was lost. Is that lost outside his body or blood that's found inside his body?
Both, actually. Mr. Winebrenner's clothes had quite a bit of blood on them. I have photographs to show you his clothing of the top part of his body. He also had a significant amount of blood that pooled in the cavities of his body. Plus, he had blood in his tissues. I couldn't possibly measure that. That's impossible to measure. But I can tell you, in the right side of his chest, where the lung is supposed to be, he had 2 1/8 cups of blood. His abdominal cavity, where the abdominal organs are, he had 1 1/4 cups in there.
I think your next slide, you talk about the second gunshot wound.
Yes. The second one went into the soft tissue of his abdomen, coursed across the midline, and came out. On its way, it injured some soft tissue and also nicked the spine. It didn't hit the cord, but it hit the spinal bone, the lumbar spine. Looking at him from top down, the yellow circles are on there to show you clearly where the entrance gunshot wounds are, and they're labeled according to my autopsy report. Number 1 is on the right side of his chest, and number 2 is on the right side of his abdomen.
And the number 1, sorry, go ahead.
I also want to point out, he has some evidence still of medical intervention. I did not put a circle around it. I didn't want to confuse you. Look please near his right armpit. You see some material there? Yes. That material there is actually a tube that went into the space around his right lung. The doctors did that. because they wanted to see if they could drain some blood away to re-expand his lung to help him. It didn't work, but I want to point out to you that is not an injury either. That's medical intervention to try to save his life.
So the bullet wound that we see, number one, you have circled, that's the one that actually went through his lung and collapsed his right lung?
Yes.
And can you describe to the jury, I guess, what happens to the body and to the person then when that kind of injury where the lung is damaged?
Actually, the mechanism is quite complex. A bullet doesn't just go in as a bullet. The bullet goes in with energy as well. So when the bullet goes into a body, a shock wave of energy follows behind it. It obviously causes massive loss of blood and causes destruction of tissue around the bullet path. When the lung is injured in such this way, it collapses, it gets sucked down, it can't re-expand because there's a hole in the chest. This lung that is collapsed, it doesn't work anymore. So if he were able to take some drugs, he wouldn't be able to re-expand that lung. People need to. A person can live without one whole lung if it's surgically removed, but in this case it was traumatically damaged. So that's very, very serious. Also, the blood that is lost into the lung cavity and the abdominal cavity isn't functional blood anymore either, because it is not in the blood vessels where it can carry oxygen to the tissues and remove waste products. So just because he still had a lot of his own blood in his body, it was not effective blood because it was in the cavity. It may as well have been outside the body. And of course he lost a lot of blood outside his body, as evidenced by the blood in his clothing.
And then this is the gunshot wound that actually, I think you said, broke or perforated some ribs, his diaphragm, and also his liver?
Correct.
As well as obviously that right lung?
Yes.
And the second gunshot wound to the abdomen, can you describe again, this went, perforated through muscle and actually went through and hit a lumbar vertebra?
Yes, the backbone, the vertebrae, there are several of them in the lumbar area. This bullet nicked the side of one of those. Now it did not break the whole bone, the chunk of the bone in the middle. It did not enter the cord either, so it didn't damage the cord directly, but the shock wave coming behind the bullet surely could have shocked and stung the spinal cord. Additionally, he lost some blood because of that bullet wound too.
And that shock wave, perhaps, I guess what would be the immediate consequence of that kind of injury being shot where either it's hitting the vertebra or the shock wave is affecting it? What could be the immediate, I guess, reaction of the body when that happens?
The spine is a bundle of nerves, comes out down the spinal column, and all the nerves come out on the sides of it. The lumbar portion's nerves come out and control the bottom part of the pelvis and the legs. If the cord is shocked or damaged in that region, everything from that point on down is also affected. So it could have caused immediate collapse because of the shock of the cord in that area. So he could have just dropped right to the ground because of the shock wave going through the cord, whereas the bullet hit the spine.
Going on to the next slide. We're talking about that.
Yes, both bullets exited the body. There weren't any other bullets in his body and no other pieces of metal that I could have retrieved. I did an x-ray of his body to check for that ahead of time. I'll show you in a moment here where the bullets exited on the back of his body. This is Mr. Winebrenner looking at him from his back. I've labeled the exit wounds as they compare to the entrance wounds. Number 1 goes with number 1, etc. So the exit wound on the right side of the back of his torso, and number 2 is just the left midline on the back of his torso near the waist.
How can you tell that these are exit wounds and in the previous slide, those were the entrance wounds?
These wounds actually have a very typical appearance. I don't have close-up photos of them, so I can't show you the photos, but an entrance wound is usually a round circle. It's punched out because the bullet goes through the skin, rips the skin, and causes a circular hole, generally speaking. If it goes straight in, it causes a circular hole. And sometimes it causes an abrasion collar on the extra skin as it drags the skin in the body. Exit wounds are a little bit different because when the bullet comes out of the body, it splits the skin like this. Splits it. So when I look at the body, I can put the skin edges back together and they go back together completely. So those are features that distinguish an entrance versus an exit. And that's what I mean.
And from the entrance and exit wounds, can you determine the position his body was in at the time he was shot?
No. The only thing I can tell you is how the bullets went through his body relative to the general anatomic position. That's how we describe them, so that everybody knows what we're talking about. There's no way I can tell the relative positions between the shooter and victim. That's not possible.
But you can say that he was shot in the chest.
In the chest and the abdomen, yes.
Next slide.
Yes, please. The only other injuries that Mr. Winebrenner had were scrapes on the fronts of his knees. They were fresh scrapes. They still have those little skin tags on them from being fresh scrapes. The skin tags pointed in the upward direction, indicating the direction of force. So this is compatible with his going down on his knees to scrape his knees on the concrete or the ground or wherever he fell on.
And just pointing them out to the jury, so each knee here and here are those type of abrasions.
Yes, the medical term is abrasion. Non-medical term will be fresh scratch.
And besides these, which you can take from him when he fell, is that fair?
Yes, they're definitely indicated upward force on his knees. Now, I don't know where his knees were when he got those abrasions, but the direction of force is definitely upward from the feet to his thighs in that direction.
Did he have any injury or abrasions to his hands? If someone is falling and falling on his knees, any evidence that he was able to try to catch himself or anything like that?
There was no evidence of that.
Is it to say that perhaps that vertebra was damaged and he did lose his ability to walk or stand and he could have fallen forward?
Objection.
Okay.
Yes, it's compatible with that, yes.
Dr. Dean, you obviously should be talking about two bullet wounds or two gunshot wounds. Could either wound by itself have caused his death, or do you make any determination about that?
Certainly the wound number 1 could have caused death very rapidly because of the features I described before. Wound number 2 is a little bit different because its mechanism is a little bit different. That is definitely considered a fatal injury because of the shock wave to the spinal cord. That one, if he had only had that one, he might have lived a little bit longer. Having said that, he also could have died from it.
And in terms of the gunshot wounds and the injury that you documented, is there any way for you to tell how far apart he was from his assailant when he was shot?
No, I can't. He was wearing clothing, and any evidence of close-range fire deposited on the clothing, it was not visible to me. And certainly he had no evidence of close-range fire on his skin. So it's not possible for me to determine how far away the shooter was from the victim.
So you can't make any determination about that?
No, that's outside the realm of pathology. I can't do that. I also wanted to show some photographs of his clothing to show you where on his clothes the bullets went and also the appearance of the bullet on his clothes. This is a jacket. I photographed the front of the clothes and then turned over into the back of the clothes. Those white tags with the blue arrows on them are pointing, yes, thank you very much. They are pointing to the holes in his clothes caused by the bullet going into his body. If I had not put those arrows on there, you really wouldn't be able to pick out those tags. They're just too far away.
And those two bullet holes correspond then with the wounds on his body?
They correspond with the wounds on his body. The dark spots looks like blood to me, yes. And this is the back of that same jacket. Those white tags with the blue arrows indicating where the bullets came out of his body through the jacket. Again, the dark spots look like blood to me. Next layer in is a plaid shirt, arrows are virtually in the same places, showing more of the same apparent blood on there. And the back of that same shirt, a lot more apparent blood. The arrows again on the exit wounds. And the final layer on the inside is a t-shirt. Again, the same thing. The arrows point to the holes, and the dark spots point to the apparent blood. This is the front. And this is the back.
And again, the significance of that blood loss, external blood loss, or the internal blood loss, the blood that's pooling in body cavities. What is the significance of that?
Oh, he lost a lot of blood. People cannot lose a lot of blood and still live. Now, one may say, well, if a person loses a lot of blood and they go to the hospital, the blood can be replaced. Well, yes and no. It can be replaced with the red blood cells and the liquid portion, but there's a lot more in blood than just those two components. So a person can only lose so much of their own blood before they go beyond the point of no return. Additionally, beyond just the blood loss, he had other mechanisms of lung collapse and spinal shock to contend with. So these were definitely fatal injuries.
Can you determine from your findings, where you're explaining to the jury, perhaps how long it would have taken Mr. Winebrenner to actually pass away?
I can't, based upon only my findings, because these injuries could have been either immediately fatal, although there was nothing specifically of these injuries that necessarily makes them immediately fatal, or he could have lived for some minutes. I have to go by the investigative report for how the time difference between when he was injured and when he was pronounced dead. That's the best I can do.
And I believe you said it was, 2:26 a.m. and he was pronounced dead, and that was at the hospital?
Yes, it was at the hospital.
We're talking about before the cause of death being a gunshot wound to the torso, the manner of death, homicide, which is...
Death at the hands of another person.
Along with your findings in the report of autopsy, which is stated exhibit 144, I mean, you go through, it's a rather lengthy report, many pages, you actually go through all the systems of the body, is that fair?
Yes.
So not only are you looking at chest and abdomen, you're looking at, any other area of the body where there could have been damage.
Yes, damage and any other natural disease.
And did you find any natural disease before the factors of death?
No, not that I've ever factors death, no.
So otherwise, or other than the two gunshot wounds that we see, he was an otherwise healthy person.
I can't say that. I did document by pathologic criteria he had hypertension, which is high blood pressure. I don't know if that was documented clinically, like at his doctor's office. By pathologic criteria, he had high blood pressure. Also, by the body mass index criteria, he was obese. Now, looking at his body, I would not say he was an obese man, but I have to go by the criteria. That's why I had to list obesity. But neither of those things contributed to his death at all.
I believe that also as part of the report of autopsy, there's a forensic toxicology report that's attached. What is that?
Yes. For every deceased person, I take samples of body fluids, so blood and urine, other body fluids, and send those fluids to the laboratory for testing if necessary. For Mr. Winebrenner, his blood was tested and his urine was tested too. He did not have any drugs of abuse in his system, but he did have some alcohol in his system.
I think that's documented. Now, there's different ways to test for alcohol in the body, correct?
I'm not a toxicologist, but I do know there are different ways. I can tell you that for Mr. Winebrenner's blood serum, the liquid portion, is tested for alcohol, just like all of other deceased people. And I can tell you the result if you need it.
I'm sorry.
I can tell you the result if you need it.
Yes.
The Serum alcohol level was 0.139.
Dr. Dean, besides the injuries that we talked about, were there any other injuries to his body? And the report of autopsy states 144, and the report of investigation states Exhibit 145. These are all documents that are kept in the ordinary course of business at the Summit County Medical Examiner's Office.
Yes, they are.
And they're actually then, your findings are signed off by Dr. Lisa Kohler, who's the Chief Medical Examiner in Summit County as well.
Correct.
And based on all your experience, your training, your examination of the victim, are all your opinions here today, your testimony given within a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes.
Dr. Dean's PowerPoint presentation that you just utilized here to assist the jury in your testimony.
I did, yes.
All right, I have no further questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
I am going to have just a couple of questions for you. You have a copy of your autopsy protocol with you, correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So if I ask questions from it, you feel free to look at it, okay?
Thank you.
One of the things that the prosecutor talked about was the shock wave. On the, I think, bullet number 2 that went into the stomach area, and talked about the shock wave near the spinal cord. Remember that testimony?
Yes.
Okay. And you can't tell us if that caused Justin Winebrenner to drop immediately, can you?
Oh, no, I think she asked me, is it possible? It is possible. I cannot tell you with certainty. It might not have happened.
So after she said perhaps, so maybe it happened like that, but maybe it didn't, correct?
Correct.
So certainly you can't say with a reasonable degree of medical certainty that that caused a shock wave to cause him to drop and collapse right there, right?
Right, I didn't say that.
Okay, I just want to make sure. You would say that Mr. Winebrenner had some alcohol. You agree with me that the legal limit for intoxication in the state of Ohio is 0.08, correct?
For driving, yes.
Okay. And you would agree with me that his was what you say was a 0.139?
Correct.
So you would say that he was intoxicated, correct?
Yes.
Okay. In fact, in your autopsy, if you look at page 2, I think it's finding number either 5 or 6, you put ethyl alcohol intoxication, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do me a favor, look on page 5 and 8 of your report. You there?
Yes.
Okay. For example, gunshot wound number 1. If you go down kind of 4 parts, see where it says trajectory?
Yes.
And what you have there is, in summary, the direction of fire was from front to back. Now clearly, you can tell by how the wounds look what's an entrance wound and an exit wound, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, you've shown pictures, the entrance wounds are in the front, exit wounds are in the back, right?
Correct.
Okay. It further goes on to say, very slightly downward and towards the middle of the body. As far as that very slightly downward, you would agree with me that all of your findings have to do with what you referred to before as the anatomical position, right?
Correct, yes.
And that's what the person standing straight up with his palms facing, I think, right?
And that's in my autopsy report, exactly. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. That's what the anatomical position is, correct?
Correct.
Now, you agree with me that when you talk about direction of a bullet, whether it's going upward or downward or anything like that, that's based on if somebody was shot standing like this, correct?
Well, actually, it's just based on the anatomic position.
Right.
I know that very few people, if any, are shot while they're standing that way, but we have to have a consistent way of describing the path of the bullet, so that's what we do.
Exactly. That was going to be my next question. Very few people get shot when they're standing just like this, correct?
Correct.
And so, based on, when you say this, you're not taking into account whether the shooter was falling back or standing over top, or if the victim was bent down or bent back or anything like that. You don't know anything about that, correct?
Well, I can't possibly know that, correct?
Okay. You said Ohio was, excuse me, 5 manners, suicide, homicide, accident, undetermined, and natural causes. And in this case, the manner of death is homicide, right?
Yes.
And that's what you found, correct?
Yes.
You agree with me, that's a medical term, correct?
Yes.
That means death at the hands of another, so somebody else shot him, correct?
Correct.
But as far as using legal terms like murder and manslaughter and self-defense and everything like that, your designation of a homicide has nothing to do with the legal part of it, fair?
That's very yes.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome.
What are your questions? Break now, ladies and gentlemen, so I'm going to give you until 10:25, 15 minutes, reminding you not to discuss this case amongst yourselves, or for anyone else to discuss with you in the presence to investigate the case and the infractions on the hand to put all the evidence. You will speak with anyone involved in the case. All right?
say again?
10:45.
10:45. 10:45?